Hi, Philip. Thanks for coming on today.
Good evening. My pleasure, mate.
So we're going to get straight into it. So a burning question that me and Cam have got, and you're the first sort of UFO expert we've had on the podcast. So we want to know what is the most plausible explanation for UFOs? What do you think the most plausible explanation for it is?
Well, I don't think there's any one explanation. I mean, a lot of people have a lot of ideas. The most popular, the most romantic notion, if you like, or theory is that we're being visited by beings, not of this world. And a lot of people are very serious about that, but there's other theories as well. I mean, going back in time, people say, well, perhaps it's some kind of secret military tech that we're observing, and going back even further, some thought it was some kind of very rare natural phenomena. They gave it the name Earthlights. Probably, in all likelihood, guys, it's the UFO phenomena is plural, so it's made up of a variety of things, which I think that's why it probably leaves us mystified, because a lot of people will pigeonhole it, say, I believe it's aliens from wherever, or skeptics will say, no, there's no proof for this, that, or the other. So, in all likelihood, in my humble opinion, it will probably be a mixture of things. And, I may be right, I may be wrong, but that's just the way I look at it.
So what you're saying is like something that we can all agree on, that there's probably some of the UFOs that people are seeing are military tech or secret military tech.
I think that would be very rare considering our little island, But having said that, one of the most famous UFO photographs to come to light in recent times originated in a place called Calvine in Scotland. It only came, they've been searching for this photograph since 1990. It was known about, in fact, there were 6 photographs, but one copy surfaced last year. And it's regarded by a lot of people as the best UFO photograph there is, but it's also believed that this is some kind of US military technology that was observed and photographed. So, that kind of tech would be very, very rare. For example, on the run into the Calvine photographs being taken in 1990, if we just step back in time slightly and open the lens a bit further, in places in what's called Westchester County, which is upstate New York, had a whole series of sightings of this boomerang-shaped object. Then in the mid-80s, up towards the 1990s, here in the UK, with a lot of sightings of the flying triangles, they had the nickname here of the Silent Vulcan, because we used to have the Vulcan bomber, which is basically like a big triangle flying across the sky. And of course, then in 1989 and 1990, we had the triangle sightings over Belgium, one of which was captured on onboard radar on an F-16 and released by the Belgian Air Force. And then in 1990, of course, hey presto, we have the Calvine photograph found at last after a long search by Dr. David Clarke in Sheffield and his colleagues. Now, could it be that Westchester County, UK, Belgium are not separate incidents, because they started in sort of mid-80s, and no sooner did they sort of phase out in one area, they popped up somewhere else? Could that have been some kind of testing of military technology? And then, of course, what happened then, we had the stealth fighter and the stealth bomber be rolled out and take part in the first Iraq war not long after. So it would be on very rare occasions that a UFO sighting may be a piece of secret tech.
Okay, but I guess the guys in the US are more likely to see that secret tech being tested.
Well, it's a big place. I don't know if you've ever been to the States. I did a lecture tour across the States once, and every time I got off the aeroplane, I had to change the time on my watch. It's difficult for us Brits I've been asked a few times by people in America, what time zone are you in? We're not big enough to have any time zones. We've got Greenwich Mean Time and British Summer Time, and that's it. So, but because of that, they've got places like Area 51. If you ever go to Las Vegas, for example, and when you drive down into Vegas, there's nothing. Once you get outside of the city, there's nothing. It is just, you're like you're on another planet. It's a perfect place to test things. And of course, if you carry on out into the desert, you eventually do come to Area 51, of course. So they can test and test away. But sometimes, tests don't always go according to plan, do they? And things go astray. And that's when maybe Joe Public sees something that perhaps he shouldn't.
And then I guess there's the potential that there's some esoteric things going on where it could be some angels or spirits that people are seeing.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, because the case that's in our recent book, it's an abduction case, and one of the abductees, Calvin Parker, he toyed with that idea. Calvin was not out and out religious, but he believed in God, a Christian, and he thought that they'd done something awful to him. So could this be demonic? And he did toy with that idea at some point, because surely if it was angelic, it wouldn't have been so nasty to him, wouldn't have done bad things to him. So he toyed with that idea, and he's not the only one. People have toyed with those ideas. And some people put UFOs and everything else all into one pot. And basically saying this is all paranormal, it is all related. Perhaps it's different sides of the same coin, but nonetheless, it is related. So, yes, there may well be esoteric. That's a big word for a Yorkshireman to say, It's not something that comes up in everyday conversation, I can assure you. But it could well be. I mean, I just keep my options open and let others who are far more intelligent than I, let them draw the conclusions, not me.
Yeah, there are loads and loads of different theories. I like the theory of aliens or UFOs being humans from the future, and they've managed to get the technology to be able to leave planet Earth.
Yeah, well, that's nothing new, I think, but it's gained some momentum in recent years, simply because I would say over the last 10 or 20 years, we've learned a lot more about the universe itself. And it's turned out, and this is the appropriate word here is visible. This is the visible universe. It's now much bigger than we ever thought it was. It's something like 48 billion light years across. I mean, that is hard to get your head around. There's an estimated 2 trillion galaxies. And of course, each of those galaxies, like our own, the Milky Way, has gazillions of stars and planets and moons. So the distances that you might have to travel to get from planet A to Earth have expanded somewhat. So people have then tended to look for other possible alternatives, i.e., we as a species, Homo sapiens, have evolved, down the millennia. So if we project ourselves, say, 1 billion years into the future, if we've not killed ourselves, not wiped us all off the planet, what may we look like? We may look like these humanoids with no hair. I haven't got much hair anyway, but, and of course they're coming back in time to maybe rectify something or find something that they no longer have. So it's an idea that's gained in popularity.
Has the sort of has there been an increase in sightings of UFOs, or have we sort of, with the internet age and the more connected we are we just hearing about more sightings?
That's always a good question. It's which comes first, the UFOs or the UFO investigator. You know, I mean, I'll give you an example. When I first started in 1980, I joined a local UFO group, the Yorkshire UFO Society. And we had a lot of sightings reported to us, but we also made ourselves very visible. There was no internet in those days, so we'd have posters and hand leaflets into reference libraries and police stations. And whenever someone contacted, we used to ask them how they'd found us, so we knew what was working and what wasn't. But we got a lot of sightings, and I often wonder, you know, had we not been there, what would have happened to those sightings? Which comes first? So today, of course, most of the local UFO groups have gone. You know, there still are a few around, but most of them have disappeared because they don't need to go and meet and publish a little newsletter and share the latest data in person. They just do it online now, you know, with anybody in the world. So it's much more easier to exchange information. And it's like when you'll hear on the news, you'll hear of crime statistics, for example. You know, this type of crime's gone up and that type of crime's gone down. Which in reality is it? Is it that certain crimes are being reported more than others? They haven't necessarily, the amount of those crimes hasn't necessarily gone up. There may have been a publicity campaign or whatever, which has brought people forward to report them. So it's always difficult to say. It really is.
What's the strangest or the most memorable sighting that you've had?
Oh, there's all kinds of things. Do you mean funny or serious?
Go with funny first.
When I was BUFORA's, it's a British UFO Research Association, I was their director of investigations. Again, no internet in those days. And I live in Pontefract now in West Yorkshire, but I used to live about 10 miles away from here. And a chap wrote to me from Pontefract. And he said he'd been out during the day over the fields with his dog, you know, taking the dog for a walk, and he'd encountered an alien. And he'd filmed it on his old video recorder, his old little camcorder. And he sent me a Polaroid still. So what he'd done, he's got the video on the TV screen. He's paused it, taken a snapshot, and sent me the Polaroid. And there's this creature there like this. And you could see it's a man with a mask on. You could even see the rubber band going round the back of his head, and it pulled his hair in. And he's got like bits of cardboard stuck on the end of his finger. So I thought, what do I do here? You know, what do I do? So on headed paper, I wrote back to this chap. I first tried his address. He sent me his address. I tried to get a telephone number for him. There was none. So I wrote back saying, this is fantastic. This is what we've all been waiting for. I'm going to notify NASA, the FBI, the CIA, MI5, you name it. You know, I must come to your house now without delay and view this video in full. So I posted it. It come back a few days later, and he said, I'm sorry, Mr. Mantle, but my son taped over it. You know, so that was the end of that, you know. And it's one of those things that always sticks in my mind when people ask me what's most memorable. That was very memorable, because the other option would be to ignore it, you know, but if you ignore it, he might try somebody else with the same tactic. You know what I mean? He knows he's been rumbled, you know, but he didn't want to admit it. So yeah, so that stands out. It really does.
Go on. What's the serious one?
Well, I would say the most serious one is in the book we've just written, but from a local point of view, again, I'd only just got involved in this subject back in the 1980s. And I did a bit of local media. And a lady rang us and she said, Philip, you'll never believe me. You'll never believe me. You never believe me. I said, well, give us a chance, you know, tell us. And she lived, the next town down from where I live here is a town called Normanton. And back in the 1980s, all this area was coal mines. My father worked down the coal mine all his life, you know, and Normanton was a coal mining area. And she said her and her children had seen this thing land in a field next to her house. So myself and a colleague, Mark Birdsall, went to interview her. They call her Mrs. Westerman. And she said it was a lovely sunny day. Children were out in the street playing a ball game. It's a made-up, invented ball game. It's just, I used to play it when I was a kid. Her husband worked down the local mine. And she said one of the kids come running in. She was washing the dishes just after lunch. She said, Mum, there's an aeroplane landed in the field next to us. She thought, you know, stupid so-and-so, what's he talking about, you know? So she goes out and from where her house is, you can see the field. There's nothing there. She lived in a cul-de-sac, and she says there was this thing on the ground, but it was shaped like a Mexican hat. So she got the children, started to go over towards it, and you went down a little dip and she lost sight of it. When she came up the other side, there was a fence, and they stopped at the fence, and she says there's now 3 tall humanoids, all in white boiler suits with something over the face, and they were waving something over the ground. The kids wanted to climb the fence and get in there, and she stopped them, and she says these people went to the back of this thing. It rose up into a clear blue sky, stopped, and was gone in a flash. Now, where she lived is right next to the M62 motorway. You know, it connects us with your mystical land in Lancashire, you know, goes out to Liverpool, and there must be tens of thousands of cars, you know, every hour go past. And she sits down at night and thinks, it'll be on the TV news tonight, you know, local news, nothing. She bought the local newspaper that week, not a thing. She even asked some of her neighbours, and they said, no. And there was 4 children and 2 of their friends, and we sat them all down, and they never called it a spaceman or an alien or anything. It was just this thing. And, you know, up until that time, we'd only read about these things coming from somewhere else. And this is right in my backyard. And like I say, they were a coal mining family like we were. I knew these type of people. I've grown up with them all my life. So they were either lying or telling the truth. There was no in between here. And I could find no reason why they'd lie. She didn't want me to take her photograph. For a long time, we weren't allowed to use her surname. And just a couple of years back, I did a podcast for someone. I don't know who it was. And a few days later, I got an email from a lady in New Zealand. And she said, I used to live in Normanton, you know, I'm an expat, but you didn't mention the family's name. I just forgot. She says, who was it? I might know him. I says, it's Westerman. She says, my best friend was Westerman. So she emailed her, and her best friend was one of those kids that were there that day. So she put us in touch with her, and I interviewed her, and she reaffirmed everything. Again, about a year or so later, I did a bit of television work, and a gentleman contacted me, and he said, I'm interested in the events at Normanton back in the 1980s. I said, yeah, why? Yeah, I've got it all written up. I'll send you it. He says, so I sent it to him, and he said, my partner was one of the children that was there that day. So he put me on to his partner. She was one of the kids' friends, and she was there that day. So I interviewed her. I said, I'll come and interview you. I'm thinking she still lives close by. Well, she didn't. She lived in Cornwall. So that was, you know, I might be dedicated, but not that dedicated. So, you know, but isn't it amazing? You know, after all these years, I often wondered, you know, if I could find the children once now they were adults. And we've run the story in the local newspaper a couple of times, and nobody has ever stepped forward. But here we are, just by coincidence. We have it reaffirmed. At least it's not the most spectacular sighting or, you know, earth-shattering, but it sort of confirmed to me that I wasn't wasting my time. Here's something in my backyard, not in Roswell, New Mexico, you know, but in Normanton, in West Yorkshire, a little mining town that you'd probably never notice if you drove past it on the motorway, and it always sticks in my mind. And I've written it up. It's in one of my books, so yeah, that's what I always like to talk about.
You mentioned Roswell. Why are there so many sightings in Roswell? And why is it famous?
Well, there aren't. That's the thing. The flying saucer era kicked off on July the 24th, 1947, when private pilot Kenneth Arnold was flying over the Cascade Mountains in Washington State. He was actually looking for an aircraft that had crashed. It's broad daylight, and he saw this flash of light come across his canopy, and he looked out in front of him, and there, flying between the peaks, was a formation, a V formation of, I think it was 7 or 9 objects. And he said they had no wings, fins, or fuselage. So when he landed, he reported it. And a local journalist said to him, "How did these objects move through the sky?" Kenneth Arnold said, "If you skipped a saucer on a pond." I think he meant a pebble, but he didn't say a pebble. He said saucer. Yeah, well, you'll have skipped a pebble at the seaside and it bounces along. That's what he meant. And then that's the day flying saucers were born. So a couple of weeks later, in Roswell, New Mexico, from the airbase, is a press release goes out, and it was from the Roswell Army Air Force. The Army and the Air Force were still linked. They were still one body. And it said something to the effect that rumors of flying discs and, and pieces of one has been found on a ranch near Roswell and is being flown to higher headquarters for inspection. Following day, another press release. Sorry, all a mistake. It was a weather balloon. And the story literally died there and then. It went around the world for a day and then died. It wasn't until the late 1970s, I think it was around about 78, 79, when an American guy, Stanton Friedman, a nuclear physicist, he'd done a TV show somewhere. And one of the crew said, "Why don't you speak to old Mr. Marcel?" He said he's handled one of these crash flying saucers back in 1947. So Stanton literally got the phone book. We don't have that nowadays, but you used to get a phone book, look through it, and there was Marcel's telephone number in it, and he phoned him. And he said he was the base intelligence officer at Roswell back in 1947. Him and another guy had been sent to this ranch outside of Roswell. It had no electricity. It was the Foster Ranch, but the guy who ran it was Mac Brazel. And Mr. Brazel said, he'd taken a piece of this stuff into the sheriff. And the sheriff phoned the airbase. And Marcel collected some of this stuff up, put it in his truck. On his way back to the base that night, or early morning, he stopped at home. He didn't live on the base with his wife and son. His son was Jesse Marcel Jr. He was, I believe, 11 years old at the time. He got him out of bed and he emptied some of this stuff onto the kitchen floor. And young Marcel picked up this piece, about an inch wide, looked on end like a capital I, and it had some kind of markings on it. And his father said, "Son, you could be the first person to see writing from another world." And then the story got out, more witnesses were interviewed, and so on and so forth. So Roswell, is the base for the first crashed flying saucer story. And it's a great place. They have a museum there now, a permanent museum. They have a big festival, every July. I've been to it. I've lectured there. But again, even now, once you get outside of Roswell, there is nothing but the desert. That literally, I know I've been there, and this will make you laugh as well. I was with a friend and we drove out of Roswell. We've been going for a few miles, and we needed the bathroom, and we come across there's a wooden toilet block built at the side of the road. It's toilets. And you go inside, and on the wall, you're standing there, and there's a sign on the wall, and it says, "Beware of rattlesnakes." Now, that is the quickest leak I have ever taken in my life, It didn't bother my pal because he was from America. He just thought, "What's up with this strange Englishman?" So, but Rob, that's Roswell for you, and it still has the festival every year. It's brilliant, it really is.
There's that place in Brazil as well that's quite famous for UFOs. Can't quite remember the name of the place.
Well, the strange thing about South America in general, especially Brazil, I have a colleague there in Brazil. They have some of the weirdest and most high strangeness cases anywhere on the planet. If you're looking for the weird and wonderful, then South America is the place to look. And there was a documentary made just recently. It's a place called Varginha.
That's the name of the place I was thinking of. Yeah,
it was where 3 young girls claim to have come across this creature one evening, and of course the creature is said to be alien, and it was captured by the military, and so on. But there are some very, very strange events in South America in general, and which the Varginha case is one of them.
Why do you think South America the cases are so strange there? What do you think?
Well, it's difficult to say. I mean, if you look at the UFO subject as a whole, rather than country by country, you can see how it changes. And it could be we're all experiencing the same phenomena, but we perceive it in different ways. Because our culture is different to South America's. Our culture is different to Asia. Our culture is different to Eastern Europe. Our culture is different to the United States. I mean, my ex-wife, God bless her, when we were traveling in the United States, she couldn't get her head around that it wasn't England. Because they were predominantly white people. They spoke English, but I kept having to remind her, we're in a foreign country. This is not England. They do things differently here. Not just drive on the other side of the road, but it is a different country. And she couldn't get her head around that, no matter how many times I told her. But so we perceive this, it's the same phenomena. We just perceive it differently. As we do all kinds of things. Why do certain countries have sightings of a religious kind, like the Blessed Virgin Mary, or statues of the Blessed Virgin Mary that bleed, or people have stigmata on their hands and feet? They only happen in Roman Catholic countries. You don't find one coming from Russia, do you? So it's all down to our culture, how we perceive this phenomena, in my opinion.
So when you say Roswell, that was sort of like the birthplace of flying saucers, is that because it sort of brought it mainstream? I mean, there would have been sightings before.
Well, like I said, it was Kenneth Arnold that kicked off the flying saucer era. Roswell just happened to come in the weeks preceding it, and it literally did flash around the world. It appeared in the Times newspaper, little column about that big, made it into the Times, and then it was gone, and it disappeared, and right until the 1970s, when Stanton Friedman found Major Marcel, who was the base intelligence officer who handled this wreckage. He said this wreckage, it was like tinfoil, but if you screwed it up and let it go, it just went back into its original shape. He said there were other pieces that they hit it with a sledgehammer and could put a dint in it. They tried to burn it, couldn't burn it. And then there were these strange, what they become to be known I-beams with this marking on. The official United States Air Force explanation was that it was a balloon. They had a program in 1947 called Project Mogul. Basically what they did, they got an array of ordinary weather balloons with some equipment attached to the bottom of them. And this was just bog standard equipment, but they launched these balloons into the upper atmosphere, and they were testing for atomic particles to see if the Russians had used an atomic bomb. So the project itself was top secret, but the actual equipment that they were using was off the shelf. There was nothing special about it in that respect. And, they've got all the diaries and all the logs from Project Mogul, and there were no launches of any balloons around the time of the Roswell crash. Not only that, Major Marcel, he's the guy that handled this wreckage. He's the guy who said this was a crash flying saucer. Just a couple of months before that, he'd actually done his training on weather balloons at the Air Force Base because they flew, so they needed to know what the weather was. And Roswell Army Air Force, back in 1947, was the home of the 509th Bomb Group, the only official atomic bomb wing in the world. It was people from the 509th that didn't fly from Roswell. But 2 years earlier, the 509th Bomb Group were the ones that were responsible for dropping the atomic bombs on Japan. So they had atomic weapons there. So it wasn't some little Air Force base stuck out in the desert. So I never met Marshall Sr. I met Marshall Jr. He became a doctor. He was also did his military service. So he was a doctor in the military as well. And I said, let's assume your father got this wrong, that it was, after all, a weather balloon, and he couldn't recognize it for what it was. Was he reprimanded in any way? I mean, he made the Air Force look a complete idiot, if that's the case. Your base intelligence officer can't recognize, a weather balloon. I said, what happened to him? He says, no, he got promoted. So, surely there would have been something that would have happened to him if he'd made such a mistake, even if he was sent to, I don't know what the American equivalent is to Siberia, maybe to Alaska, out of the way, because it was an embarrassment, you know what I mean? But nothing happened. And of course, since then, since he came out of the woodwork, so to speak, in the late 70s, they've located more people that were there, and people more have spoken about it. And it's still argued about today. Was it something man-made or not of this earth? It's either one or the other. Everybody agrees that something did crash at Roswell, New Mexico, out in the desert. The Air Force, the United States Air Force, say it was Project Mogul, i.e. weather balloons. Others say, I don't think so. Something not of this earth.
So when you fast forward so if you're looking back then, a lot of government, media, people in general, were always quick to dismiss UFOs or things that are not from this world. How come over the last, year, it seems like the government, the US government anyway, and the US media have started to at least acknowledge that UFOs could possibly be real?
Yeah, I mean, it swings and roundabouts, it's peaks and troughs. I mean, if you look at any of the documents, the UFO documents released by the Ministry of Defense, they're all in the National Archives now. Our MOD has never denied there's things in the sky that they can't identify. They've never denied that, but they said we're not interested in them unless they pose a threat to the defense of the United Kingdom. And none of them have posed a threat. Therefore, we're not interested. But they readily admit there's things we can't, we don't know what they are, but they're not hurting the UK, but of no defense significance. So therefore, we're not interested. And in recent years, it started in 2017 when there was a New York Times article talked about a secret American UFO study. And these 3 videos were released that have been filmed by the US Navy and so on. So it brought the subject into the mainstream. A number of politicians got involved, some of which are quite high. Senator Harry Reid was involved and so on. So it wasn't just UFO researchers. There was politicians and things like that, and people of that note involved. And they formed a little group, an unofficial group. They're not, and they put pressure on the politicians in America. It's a very different political system to ours, of course, which has led to hearings and so on. And what that does that changes the way that the media view the subject as well. So if politics are taking it seriously, and politicians, maybe we should take a serious look at it as well. For example, if we go back to the 1990s, there was a Harvard professor called Dr. John Mack, Pulitzer Prize winning author as well. He was a psychologist, and he came out and said that there is something behind the abduction phenomena. And he wrote a book about it. It was, bestseller around the world. So again, when you have somebody of that stature taking, part of the subject very seriously, then the media tend to follow suit. Sadly, Dr. John Mack got run over in London while attending an event here and died. But when you have a presence like that, the media tend to think twice before they start making fun of you, because you just say, "Well, speak to Dr. Mack. He'll tell you. He'll tell you otherwise." So it's peaks and troughs. We're in a peak at the moment. There's a lot of media attention, a lot of politicians involved, and members of Congress, and so on and so forth. And it'll be interesting to see where it all leads.
Have you done much research, or do you have much knowledge around Bob Lazar and what his claims are?
No, I don't know much about Bob Lazar, but I don't believe a word he says. I mentioned Stanton Friedman. Stanton's sadly no longer with us, but Stanton was he was one of these guys who loved to root around the archives and find material. Again, pre-internet days, they would literally get, and he could find no information that supported Mr. Lazar. He found information that, wasn't supportive of Mr. Lazar. Let's put it that way. For example, Lazar claimed he went to MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and all his files have been wiped. Well, that's all right. Let's assume the powers that be can do that. But what about your mate sat next to you in the lectures? What about your lecturer? Don't they remember you? I've got a photograph of me at school, at high school, and nobody ever remembers Bob Lazar. So I think it's, he may well believe what he's saying. Personally, I don't believe a word.
When, because you've been studying this since the 1980s, whenever there's sort of a phase where the media take it serious, because the media does work in phases, they'll pick a story up and then in a week or two it'll be the next story. But when you see these phases the media takes, do you start hearing about more people seeing UFOs during these phases?
Sometimes, yes. And like I said, today is easier than ever to report things. But I still get things in the old conventional way as well. I mean, this is literally letters, a letter from a guy with a stamp on it. For all those millennials, this is a postage stamp. You cannot use this on your iPhone. And he's gone back, this old boy's gone back down the years and has written to me and told me about them. And he's even put in a couple of photographs of the locations as well. And he's given me permission to use his name if I want to write it up, so I will do. So we still get that, but mostly it's now via the thing that we're sat in front of today. And you never can tell from one day to the next, what's going to drop in your inbox. And long may that continue.
What do you think of the theory that us as humans were engineered by beings from outer space?
I mean, ancient astronauts.
Yeah.
Well, that was popularized by Eric von Daniken. Eric's from Switzerland. I met him once. I met him at a conference in Vienna many, many years ago. A very nice guy. His first book was called Chariots of the Gods. And I remember reading it when I was a teenager, and I found it fascinating. Don't take all of the claims in it serious. But what Eric was saying is, don't accept everything you're told either. Because if we all sat around and just agreed, we'd never make any progress anywhere. We'd still be sat in a cave with, arguing over whose turn it was to light the fire, So what Chariots of the Gods for me did is say a challenge. I'm not sure about that. I want to know more about that. I want you to explain that for me. And it might be right, but on the other hand, it might not. And basically, Chariots of the Gods, ancient astronauts, that when we were still a primitive species here on Earth, that beings from another world arrived here or even came here first and genetically manipulated our species. And the UFOs that we see today are perhaps them coming back and keeping an eye on us, see how we're progressing or not, as the case may be, And it's a very interesting theory. It's an amazing theory, isn't it? Wouldn't it be nice if we could prove something like that? And of course, Eric and others of that ilk look at man-made structures around the world and say, well, man either couldn't have made that at that time, or he must have had help with it, like the pyramids, for example. I've been to Egypt. I've seen the pyramids, and they are amazing, but they were built by our ancestors, There were people like you and me who built them things. But there are still mysteries to be solved. And it's a great theory. It really is. And, and Eric, is still going. I think he's in his 80s now, still writing books. And I'd recommend them. If that's something you're interested in, have a read.
Mm. Yeah, because I've heard some theories on it, and they're basically talking about how the Bible is telling the story of basically alien beings that came and created humans, and the Garden of Eden was like a laboratory.
Yeah, it's predominantly things in the Old Testament of the Christian Bible, because spectacular things did happen. The New Testament is about Jesus, of course, and I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm not denying anyone's religion, but these are old stories. There's a flood story like Noah and his ark. There's a flood story in many ancient cultures, all from different time periods. So there may well have been a flood somewhere on Earth. And in those days, we didn't record it. We recorded things orally. We'd sit round the campfire and we'd tell each other stories, like some indigenous populations still do to this very day in certain parts of the world. And of course, those stories, every time you tell them, change, even ever so slightly. But over centuries, it changes dramatically, and it's then moved from being a local flood to being a flood across the earth. I remember, my mum was a Christian. She believed in the Bible and Jesus and everything. And I read the Bible when I was about 14. And I remember reading about Noah's Ark. So we'd all been bad. God was going to punish us. He saved Noah and his family and all the animals 2 by 2. The earth was completely flooded. He sailed around and the waters receded and he landed on Mount Ararat in Turkey. Well, even as a 14-year-old, I said to myself, well, where the hell did all the water go? If you flooded everything on Earth, if the whole Earth, there's no land, it's just water, everything's flooded, where did all the water go? Because it receded and they landed on Mount Ararat. Doesn't make any sense, does it? God doesn't say, I scooped up the water and shoved it somewhere else out of the way. It was me that, it just said the water receded. Well, how could it? It's so, but they're great stories. And some people, again, have put their own interpretation on them, and say, well, this sounds like a spaceship. Well, we don't know if it's a spaceship because we don't know what a spaceship looks like. We have rockets we've gone to the moon, but that's it. We don't. But it's fascinating, isn't it? It's kind of a modern version of trying to explain the story of Genesis, how we were created, how we first walked on this earth. And whether you're a creationist or you believe in evolution, we did start here on Earth, and here we are today, top of the food chain. For how long? No one knows.
Well, it's like what you were saying earlier with religion, especially if you look at religion from around the world, it's different stories and people are perceiving them stories in completely different ways.
Well, if you look at the three main religions, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, they all originated in the same area. They all have Jesus in them. Jesus is, I believe, is a prophet in Islam, but he's not the prophet. He's a prophet. In Judaism, he was a just a rabbi, a holy man, and of course in Christianity he was the Son of God. But nonetheless, he's in all three religions. But they're all these religions started in pretty much the same area, and you think, well, why did that? But so you've got the same story, but you've got three different perceptions of it that turn out to be Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, that's a spread of that story basically being retold and retold in different areas.
And if you look at Christianity, then you've got all the branches of Christianity. There's the Methodists, there's the Catholics, there's the Church of this, the Church of that. There's many sort of subcategories of the Christian church.
And further breaking down.
And we can bring it right up to modern times, because there are a tribe in Papua New Guinea who believe that Prince Philip, who died a couple of years back, was a deity. He was like the Son of God. And when they came to England, this tribe came to England, just a handful of them, and they had a private meeting with Prince Philip. Now, can you imagine what those men felt like? To him, he was a deity. And up until the Second World War, the Emperor of Japan was a deity to his people. So when we're talking about, deities, we're not talking about just thousands of years ago. We still have them in modern times today. If you look at Rastafarians, they based theirs on the Emperor Haile Selassie, who's died. He was an Ethiopian emperor. Because it says in the Bible, when Jesus returns, he will be known as the King of Kings. Well, just by chance, the Emperor Haile Selassie was known as the King of Kings by his people. So there, the Rastafarian religion grew out of that. So we still get modern perceptions of religions happening today. It's not something that always happened in the past. It still happens now.
So Rastafarians are stem from Christianity?
Yes, kind of. Because, like I said, Jesus, was crucified, was resurrected, went back to heaven and said, I will return. When he will return, he will be known as the King of Kings. The Emperor of Ethiopia was Haile Selassie, and he got the name the King of Kings. Hence, he was said to be Jesus returning to earth. And that's where Rastafarianism started from, with the Emperor Haile Selassie.
Right. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. And of course, like I said, the tribe in Papua New Guinea believed Prince Philip was a deity. Can you imagine what they felt like when they went to Buckingham Palace and had a private, let alone meeting him? First of all, you're walking Buckingham Palace, because these guys lived as tribesmen, and it was funny. It was a little TV series that was done, and they brought them to England, and they lived with an English family in a couple of places. And they laughed at a squirrel running around the tree and said, if that were back home, we'd have shot it. We'd be eating that, And they went to Buckingham Palace and they said, why can't we go in? Because here's our king here. They thought he could, because he was their king, or I don't think they quite called him a king, but he was their tribal leader. He should be able to just walk in. But they made a private meeting with Prince Philip for them. And you can't imagine what those people would have felt like. You cannot, you believe Prince Philip is a deity.
Did they explain why they thought Prince Philip was a deity?
They probably did, but I can't remember it. But I do remember before I watched it knowing that for some reason they did, and I just can't remember why. But what it shows you is that, you know, religion is not something that's just lost in the past. It still develops today, like UFOs, like the paranormal do. You know, I'll give you an example. One of the things that are sometimes linked to a possible alien abduction case is missing time. A person will be driving home, see something, next thing they remember, they're back home, no idea how they got there, you know, an hour's gone. And they either remember it or they use hypnosis to bring out so-called lost memories, missing time. A couple of 100 years ago, it's an old folk story. There's a master going home on his horse with his servant walking behind him. They're not far from home, and the master says, I'll trot along, you catch up. So the master obviously is on his horse, he gets on first, and he's waiting for his servant. And he turns up later than expected. So the master said, where the hell have you been? He said, well, I was grabbed by the fairies and I was taken to a fairy mound. And inside the mound, it was illuminated, but there was no lanterns. He thought he'd only been gone about 5 minutes, you know, but it was hours late. Well, today we have the same phenomena, but we don't call it, you know, I haven't encountered the fairies. I've met aliens. And they don't necessarily say the light, there was no lanterns. They say the light just came out of the walls. So you've got the same phenomena a few hundred years apart, perceived in different ways.
Well, yeah, you got to identify the similarities in the stories from back then to what we've got today.
Yeah, and I think it's like the language they would have used back then is not the same language we would use today. With our understanding of technology, we use like different wording to what they would use, like aliens.
Well, the only thing that separates us is technology. Our brain power was the same. You know, you look at Leonardo da Vinci, you know, Middle Ages, but he was doing drawings of helicopters, an aqualung, an aeroplane. You know, he used mirror writing, so you couldn't read it. Well, you could if you knew what he was doing, you know, but nobody could understand it. You know, so all he was restricted by was the technology. He just didn't have the technology to bring his inventions to life. 500 years later, he did.
Do you think it's likely that, or there's reason to believe that if aliens have made contact with the Earth, they are around us and we don't even know about it?
Could well be. I mean, I run a thing called Flying Disc Press. It's a little publisher, just me. And a few years back, I published a book by a Romanian scientist called Dr. Dan Farkas. Dan had already done one book of UFO sightings in Romania. And he wrote a book called Hyper Civilizations. And this is his theory. And he believes that we are being visited by beings that are not of this world. But they are so far advanced that we as a species are just too dumb on the evolutionary scale to know what the hell is going on. And he gives an example. If you were to take your computer screen now and put it in an ant's nest, the ants would know it's there. They crawl all over it. You know, the soldier ants might even have a go at trying to attack it. But never in a zillion years will they ever know what it is, where it's come from, what it's made of. You know, we won't be able to know how they perceive this thing in front of them. But yet an ant's colony is very well organized. It's very well structured. So maybe we as a species are the ants on an intergalactic scale. So yes, we are being visited, but we're too damn dumb to try and figure it out. We perceive it in our own way. Doesn't necessarily mean that's what you see. Have you ever watched the movie Contact with Jodie Foster? No? Watch it. because at the end she goes, basically there's alien contact via radio telescopes, and they send a blueprint to build this machine. She goes in the machine and she goes to meet the aliens. And the alien she meets is her dead father. And it's not really her dead father, it's not a ghost. They appear to her in such a way that won't frighten her. You know? So that's how she was perceiving these beings as looking like her dad, a deceased father. Watch it. It's an excellent film. That's just simply called Contact.
I've heard of it. I've just never seen it.
It's an excellent film.
Mm.
I won't tell you any more, so I won't spoil it for you, but it's well worth a watch.
Yeah, I'll give you a shout once I've watched it, actually. Yeah, because there's obviously people like Elon Musk who people say is doing that much stuff. Like, if you look at the amount of businesses he runs and all of that sort of stuff, there was the rumor going around that he is either alien or he has been given blueprints from an alien species, or he's had some sort of connection with aliens. Do you think it could be a possibility that you can get onto that? Because when you're talking about us as a human species being too dumb, there's obviously the spirituality side of everything where people can connect to the higher self or the higher power, or
well, they can allegedly connect. Let's not say it's an absolute, because it's not, is it? But Elon Musk, there was a quote going around Twitter from Elon Musk, and he said, "Look, I've got 600 or so satellites in orbit. So if there were any aliens coming here, I'd know about them." Well, he's talking about the technology, the human technology. And who's to say that an alien technology wouldn't be entirely different? Not just different, so different we can't even think about it. I mean, there are particles passing through you and I right now. We can't see them, can't feel them. When you touch your desk in front of you, is it solid? Well, it's not, is it?
no, it feels solid to us, but
it's not solid. It's made up. It's made up of atoms. You know, zillions of them, with electrons and what have you spinning around these atoms. But yet you put your hand on it, you kick it, it's going to hurt your toe, isn't it? But it's not solid. And it's like when the first astronauts went into space, kept seeing these little flashes of light, but nothing was picked up on the instrumentation. And it's these little subatomic particles that pass through metal, flesh, bone, and don't leave any trace. Of course, when they pass through their eye, it left was this little momentary flash. But up until then, they'd no idea. They thought, fireflies. I've seen fireflies in America. I was visiting a friend there. I didn't know they had fireflies there. And we come home, it was late, it was dark. And I see these flashes of light. I'm thinking, bugger me, I'm tired. I'm seeing lights. You know what I mean? Hellfire. I know it'd been a long day. And they weren't. It were fireflies. So, you know, so there are particles all around us that pass right through us. You know, radio waves pass through us, you know. And so if we have an alien technology that is billions of years in advance of us, would it really be nuts and bolts like we have today? I'm not so sure. You know, it may be so bizarre. We just like Dr. Farkas said, we just could not recognize it. No matter how many satellites you've got, you know, it goes beyond satellite imagery. You know,
it's even when you look at us today and compare us to ourselves, humans, 100 years ago, show them an iPhone and show them the capabilities of an iPhone. They wouldn't be able to comprehend how that iPhone works.
No, well, I don't know. You might be able to explain it to them. You might eventually get through. But it would be baffling, certainly. And you may be laughed at. If you go back a couple of 100 years and try it, if you go back to Middle Ages times, you might have been burnt at the stake, you know, as a witch. But I mean, that's true. If we look at computer power today, this is why a lot of people, certainly in America, don't believe that the Americans ever went to the moon. Because the computer power of the lunar lander and the lunar module were tiny, in comparison to what we have available today. But what people forget is they were designed to do a specific task, and they did it remarkably well, because they could spend a lot of the amount of money they could spend on getting it right was, it cost what it cost. I think it was something like 5% of the gross domestic product, GDP. So 5% of the America's GDP went into the space program. In other words, money was no object. So what the things that they made compared to today's technology, you think, no way, but they were so well designed. So much money was thrown at them to get them to do what they did, and they did it remarkably well. But today, Elon Musk, with all his inventions and all his money, what's he doing? Still using rockets. It might be the biggest rocket ever built, but it's still a rocket. The Chinese had rockets 3,000 years ago made out of gunpowder, So we're still using rockets now. It's the same principle. So if we ever want to traverse the stars and planets, we're never going to be able to do it with rockets, because we can't get far enough. So if you put another species on a planet elsewhere that has invented technology, there's no reason why they should, of course. They might not totally different to us. They might be quite happy, sat in a cave, plenty of food, But let's assume there is a technological civilization that's billions of years in advance of us. Would they be using rockets? Well, they'd never get here, would they? Not only that, how would they find us? I give you two guys now Star Trek technology, so you can go anywhere you want in the universe, anywhere. Bear in mind, the universe is 48 billion light years across. So to get from one side to the other, it's going to take you 48 billion years traveling at the speed of light. Where the hell would you go? How would you look for another species? Well, people talk about we release radio waves into the atmosphere all the time, which we do. We have done so for, 150 years-ish? Soon there will be no more radio waves. Everything will be digital. So our radio signature will be not there no longer, be gone. So it's a pinprick in the universe, is what the amount of information we sent out. Watch the film Contact, and you'll understand what I'm talking about there. So soon, if there's another species using the same or similar technology to us, like radio telescopes, it won't be long before we're not sending any more messages out, because everything will be digital.
And then to them, it might just look like we've died out as a planet.
Well, what if you've never invented radio on your planet? You wouldn't know what it was. It'll pass by you. You don't even recognize it.
Yeah, because they might be channeling something else, something completely different.
Yeah. And what's to say intelligent species are not technologically minded? They're quite happy. They live in peace. They've got an abundance of food. They don't get ill. Quite happy where they are. But yet they might be millions of years older than us. We always think like mankind, because that's the only way we can think. We've tried to leave our planet. We've got to the moon. We've sent probes to various planets, and the Voyager probe has left the solar system. So we assume that other species, if they are out there, want to do the same. But why would they? Not necessarily. Yeah, they might be quite happy.
Yeah, but the ego of the human plays a role in that.
Yeah, probably. But these are just thoughts that we've all had at one time. I'm sure. We've all looked up in the stars and said, "I wonder if there's anybody looking back at us."
Yeah, 100%.
So, Philip, do you know much about the US Space Force and what the reason was why that's been set up?
I don't know. It seems a bit peculiar to me, but I think it's that is politics with the Soviet Union. I think this is a kind of attempt because it's not new about space and weapons and things like that. You had Ronald Reagan and his Star Wars. He was going to put missiles in space, so if the Soviet Union ever launched a nuclear missile, they could just blow them up before they got anywhere. What he didn't tell the American public was that the technology to do that didn't exist, so he couldn't do it. But the Russians might not have known that, and they might have thought, what, he can do this. Why can't we, comrade? Well, you can't, comrade, because the technology doesn't exist. So it could be a similar kind of thing, Russia's sort of floated along for a few years, and everybody thought they were coming into the fold. They had the Olympics, they had the World Cup, and then Putin goes off on one and invades the Ukraine. And now, certainly in Europe, we're seeing proposed increase in military spending in the UK, whereas over the last few decades we've turned it down. And this could be another move, a similar type of thing with the US. We'll call it a space force. It sounds great, doesn't it? But how the hell are you going to get a space force into space? It's like a cartoon, isn't it? Space force. In reality, it probably never exists, or it might do on paper, and you might have a few men in uniforms, but it's public organisations like Elon Musk that are putting the satellites up now, not NASA. NASA are paying others to do it. It's cheaper. It makes sense. It just makes commercial sense. But going into space is still a very difficult and dangerous business. We get a bit complacent, I think, with space. And it's caused, accidents, of course, with the space shuttles, one blowing up, taking off, the other one burning up as it entered the atmosphere. Because they got a bit blasé about it. Oh, get the next one ready, and that'll go in 3 months' time. And, bits falling off it. We'll stick it back on, it doesn't matter. And away you go, and they end up dead. But going into space is very difficult and very dangerous and very expensive. So how the hell are you going to have a space force? People talk about the secret space program. You've got to go up in rockets. I don't care what. You can't hide a rocket takeoff. No matter where you launch from anywhere on the planet, somebody's going to see it. So there is no way of keeping it secret. So somebody says to you, I'm part of the secret space program, and yeah, I bet you are. Yeah. See you later.
Okay, so do you want to give us a bit of an introduction, a bit of a demo into your most recent book, Beyond Reasonable Doubt? What is it? What is it about?
Beyond Reasonable Doubt, the Pascagoula alien abduction. Back in 1973 in Pascagoula, Mississippi, was October the 10th, 1973. Two local guys, Charlie Hickson, who was 42, his buddy Calvin Parker, been at work in the shipyard that day. Big river, they still build ships on it today. A lot of military vessels were built there. And it's Calvin's first day at work there. He lived 200 miles away, but he just got engaged and he wanted a regular 9-to-5 job. Charlie was a foreman there, got him a job. The idea was he'll stay with Charlie Monday to Friday, go home on a weekend. And if he likes it and settle down, then he's getting married the next month. They might find a place for him and his wife. They're driving home in Calvin's brand new car that night, a Hornet Rambler, whatever the hell one of those is, that's what they were driving. And both guys love to fish. So Charlie said, "Do you want to go fishing, son?" Oh, yeah. So they'll go back to Charlie's apartment, get the fishing gear, get some bait, off they go. Now, this is not an out-of-the-way spot. It's right next to Highway 90, but it was an old shipyard that was closed. It's called the Shaw Peter Shipyard. So there's junk all over it. It's a bit of a mess. So they parked themselves on an old pier. It's falling apart, is this pier. They sat down, fishing. As they were driving in, Calvin had noticed his sign saying no entry. Charlie says, Ten, I know his son. I come here all the time. So they're fishing away. Calvin says, there's a blue light comes from behind them. And he thinks, oh no, it's the police. We're going to spend the night in jail for trespassing. So they both stand up and they turn around. Of course, it's not the police. There is this rugby ball shaped object descending. It stops about 2 feet above the ground. It's got two big lights on the left-hand edge. This opening appeared, and the light from it is it's like a bluish light. It's dazzling. It's so bright it hurts their eyes. They have to shield their eyes. These three humanoid creatures float out of this thing. Again, they don't touch the floor. They describe them as being about 5 feet tall, head, no neck, pointed protrusions out of the side and out of the front, long arms with mittens or pincer-like appendages. Their legs are stuck together. They never move. They're grey in colour, but they're wrinkled, a bit like an elephant skin. 2 grabs hold of Charlie. He's terrified, but he feels a prick in his arm and he relaxes. The only thing he can move is his eyes. Calvin is the same. One of them gets hold of him. They take them into this thing. Calvin to the left, Charlie to the right. Calvin is put on a transparent bed, table, call it what you will, at an angle. This creature stands to almost like standing attention to one side out of the way. This thing comes out of the ceiling about the size of a mobile phone, stops in front of him and goes around him, making a clicking noise, and goes back up into the ceiling. Calvin says, so bright inside. Like I mentioned earlier, he says the light is coming out of the paint. And then from behind him, he hears something, and another creature appeared, and it looks like a woman. Just looks like a normal woman. Except she's got a blue suit on, blue one piece, and her middle fingers are somewhat longer. She opens his mouth, puts her fingers into his nasal cavity. It hurts. His lower clothing is removed. His shoes and socks are removed. And they stick something in his foot. And he said it hurt. Cutting a long story short, both guys are deposited back outside. And Calvin is stood facing the water with his arms out. And Charlie comes around first and are you all right? You all right, son? They turn around and see this thing gone. I mean, it's off like a shot. They debate what to do. Both guys are scared out of their mind. Calvin more than Charlie. Charlie had been in the army and had fought in the Korean War. They decide they're not going to tell anybody. So they go to Calvin's car. Like I said, it was a brand new Rambler Hornet. When they open the passenger door, all the glass falls out. Calvin said it took him about 20 attempts to start it. She did. On the way home, Charlie had a change of heart. We've got to tell somebody, son. What if these things come back and do this to somebody else? What if it's an invasion? So they stop at a local shop, convenience store they call it, a local shop that had a payphone. And Charlie, being ex-military in the army, he knows there's Keesler Air Force Base is just outside of the town, so he brings the Air Force Base. They said, we're not involved in UFOs anymore. Call the police. So they ring the police. It's passed over to Jackson County Sheriff's Department, who send a car out and they escort them into town. So both guys are interviewed separately by the sheriff and his deputies. They're then put in a room together, and the deputy says, I'm just going to go get some coffee, guys. I'll be back in 5 minutes. Unbeknown to Charlie and Calvin, there was a tape recorder playing in the desk next to them. So about 5 or 6 minutes later, the deputy comes back. He takes something out of the drawer. They don't see what it is. Goes and plays it to the sheriff, thinking, we'll have these two rednecks now. They'll be laughing and joking in there. Of course, certainly not. Certainly not. Calvin's almost crying. He's saying his prayers at one point. He's crawling up the wall. So the sheriff and the deputies now think, something's really happened to these fellas. So they say, look, get yourself off phone. And they beg the sheriff not to tell anyone. He said, I'm not telling anybody. So they go home. Calvin gets a shower, dumps all his clothes in the bin, and he gets washed in bleach. He finds a bottle of bleach and he gets washed in bleach. They go to work the next morning, and they notice there's a few more cars there than there normally is. They're taking a notice of it. Within minutes, they're summoned to the boss's office. And he said, what the hell have you two been up to? The phones won't stop ringing. Somehow, the story got out. And all the news media wanted to interview them. So the sheriff comes and he takes both guys to the local hospital. They're given a checkup there. They're fine. Somebody mentions radiation. Well, the hospital can't check for that. So the sheriff phones Keesler Air Force Base. And they said, yeah, fetch them over. Kind of ironic, they phoned that place the night before. So they're taken to Keesler Air Force Base. Geiger counters waved over them, they're clear. But the officers in charge say, why are you here? Why don't you tell us what happened, guys? So they go in and they tell them. Unlike the sheriff, they didn't have a tape recorder, but they had a stenographer. You'll have seen one in a courtroom, tapping away, recording everything that's said. And it produced a 17-page transcript, which we have, all unredacted, so there's all the officers named and everything. Every word is there. That is one of the things that's published in our book. The secret tape done at Jackson County Sheriff's Department that night, we have that. That's transcribed in our book. So Calvin Parker, he almost went into hiding. Charlie Hickson, he would go on television, UFO conferences and tell it. Charlie died in 2011. He'd written a book in 1983 with a chap called William Mendes, and I got the permission to republish it. And I was looking to see if I could find Calvin Parker, because Calvin had never told his full story. I managed to find him, and eventually he said, I'm thinking of writing my own book, Philip. So that was it. I give him a contract, and we agreed to write, and he wrote a book. It's called Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter. Became an Amazon bestseller, which amazed all of us. And like you've said, that the media have changed now. Calvin was treated with respect. You know, he did local, national, and international media. Whereas back in 1973, all people did was laugh at them, call them drunks, or, you know, two rednecks from the South. You know, they're on the hooch. Which was, you know, I've been drunk many a times, guys, and I've never imagined anything. I've never, you know, weren't it that easy? But so in 2018, Calvin tells his story. And what it did, it encouraged other people to step forward. For example, where they were fishing, right next to it is a huge great bridge. Used to be a drawbridge in those days. The drawbridge would go up to let the ships under. It's now a big 4-lane highway. We had a gentleman called Rusty Anderson, was driving over the bridge that night with his wife. He was going home. And he said, I saw this blue thing, Philip, but not up in the sky, down below him. He said, I thought it was going to crash. The next day, he went down to his aunt's, who lived down by the river, and the first words she said to him was, you'll never guess what I saw that night. You know, and then they heard about Charlie and Calvin on the local news and thought, oh, fire, I saw that thing that last night. On the other side of the river, there was a shipyard. And Calvin was doing a book signing in Pascagoula. This old boy came up. Thank you, Mr. Parker. I'll have a book, please. Oh, by the way, I saw that thing that night. So he had a quick natter and then he was gone. And we'd no idea who the hell he was, what his name was. Fortunately, somebody was taking photographs. And we have a picture of this old boy buying his book. So we put it on social media. Anybody know this gent? The local library contacted me and said, yeah, I know who he is. I'll ask him if I can give you his phone number. So they did. His name was Mr. Lewis Lee. And he was working in the shipyard. He says, Philip, I was a crane operator. And he says, the cab of my crane was about 10 feet off the ground. And he says, as soon as I got in it that night, he said, you get a great view, obviously, because of the job you do. He said, out over the water, not up in the sky, out over the water is this damn thing. It's like a diamond. He says, I'd never seen anything like it. And he watched it for minutes. He says, the only reason I took my eyes off it is because my colleague down below was shouting at me. So I had to attend to what I was doing. And he said, when I looked back, it was gone. Calvin was interviewed by a local journalist, and she made a little video, about 8 minutes long. Somebody put that on YouTube, and I'm reading all the comments underneath. There was one comment, and it said, my mum and dad were on the opposite side of the river that night. They too saw the UFO. And so this person had used their real name. And I found her on social media, explained who we were. I said, could I speak to your mum and dad, please? She said, I'll ask. She come back, yes, it's Mr. and Mrs. Blair, Jerry and Maria. Here's their phone number. So I rang them up, and it was Maria I spoke to first, Mrs. Blair. Mr. Blair, back in 1973, worked offshore in the oil rigs. So they were on the opposite side of the river, sitting in the car by a little pier. There was a boat at the end of the pier, but they were waiting for his boss to come. And then they would, go out to the oil rigs. Boss was late. And she said, we saw this blue thing come down the river. And it stopped over the opposite bank and was flying around as if it was looking for something. She knew the area. She knew there was no airfield or anything like that there. As you go further back, it's residential. And then they decided to put Mr. Blair's belongings on the boat. So it's pitch black, but there is a full moon. And they're walking down the pier, and she says, this huge splash in the water next to me. And out of the water, right up onto the pier, comes this grey man. I mean, literally like that in front of her face. And then it went back into the water and was gone. She ran up, threw her husband's stuff on the boat. She said she thinks it was about 9 o'clock. In no time at all, she's running back down the pier, back to the car. It was now 12 o'clock. So her husband was gone for several days. And I spoke to Mr. Blair. He was a bit grumpy. And he'd said, we decided not to tell anybody. People think we're nutcases, And even then, he was only admitting to seeing this blue light. In 2019, they met Calvin. Calvin was still alive. They met him. They became friends with him. They talked about this blue thing. And then Mr. Blair took seriously ill. He got heart problems. And he was going in hospital for an operation. He wasn't sure if he was going to make it. So he says to his wife, I've got something to tell you. He's thinking, what? Has he been messing with somebody else, No. He says, we too were abducted that night. And he told her about these creatures. They took him on board. He was trying to protect her. She only had glimpses of it. And when he was in hospital, literally the day before his operation, he made Mrs. Blair phone me on the mobile phone. And he told me, he said, Mr. Mantle, I lied. I saw exactly the same as my wife. Fortunately, he survived the operation, but it was only a temporary fix. And he continued telling Mrs. Blair more information before he passed away. So it was like a deathbed confession, but it was spread out over a short period of time. Mrs. Blair then wanted to undergo regressive hypnosis. She knew Calvin had done it in the past. She knew Charlie had. And we said, no, you still haven't got over your husband dying. So eventually she came back to her and said, I'd like to try it. So I managed to locate a local professional hypnotherapist who would do it. Her name was Crystal Slaughter. And not only that, she'd come to your location as well. So we had the hypnosis at Calvin Parker's residence at the end of 2022. I think it was September. I'm not exactly sure of the date. And I had it filmed as well. I hired a professional cameraman to film it. We didn't tell the hypnotherapist anything. So she knew nothing about what was going on. We gave her a date, a time, and a location. And that was it. Like I said, we had it all filmed. It's all recorded. And Mrs. Blair basically retold what she'd already told us. But then she said that these creatures wanted her eggs and DNA to recreate beings that could walk amongst us unrecognized. And so we're none of us expecting this. So we asked her later about this, and she came to the conclusion that these were aliens. This is her conclusion, not mine. That her and her husband were the target that night because the husband had indicated that there'd been previous encounters. Plus, they were due to be there that night. They were scheduled to be at that pier, waiting for that boat to go out. Charlie and Calvin only decided to go to the other side of the river that night, fishing, on the way home from work. And she said that Charlie and Calvin were almost like collateral damage. While we're here, we'll have a go at them too as well, And so the case for years was just Charlie and Calvin. Mainly Charlie, because Calvin literally did disappear. So Calvin told his story, so we got full accounts from both guys. But since then, it's expanded and expanded and expanded. I started working with Dr. Irena Scott, a retired academic. I published a number of her books. And the first people she interviewed for us was Mr. and Mrs. Blair. And she kept in touch with them, adding information as it came in, because it just made sense. I'd ring people in Mississippi or wherever that God knows what time of night. I kept getting the time zones wrong. Then they hear this strange sounding fella from across the Atlantic, So it just made sense. We have, my colleague, Dr. Scott, lovely lady from Ohio, ringing you at the right time, being polite, you can understand every word she said. And so I think Irene has interviewed 40 or 50 people, some who were around at the time, not necessarily seen anything. For example, we found the doctor who examined Charlie and Calvin back in 1953. He was called Dr. Bosco. She interviewed him, So when you put all this, we'd written a number of articles that Irena and I can only write so many article guys, And we got all this information, so we said, what do we do with it? We'll put it in a book. And the book originally had a different title. And Irena and I said, we're going to put everything in it. We'll not miss anything out. There's nothing redacted, nothing withheld. And I was watching a courtroom drama on TV one night. And they said, we have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And I went, ding dong, ding dong. That's it. That's the name of the book. I emailed it to Irena. What do you think of this? So it's not a conclusion. Maybe it is. What we've said is that if we were able to take all these people and all this evidence into a courtroom, we could prove beyond a reasonable doubt that something extraordinary happened that night. Not that they were abducted by aliens, but something really bizarre did take place. What? We leave the reader to draw their own conclusions. Here's everything we've accumulated. You try and, I'm not intelligent enough to try and figure it out. Dr. Scott maybe, it's kind of funny. When Dr. Scott and I are on a podcast and they read my CV out, it takes about one breath. When they read Dr. Scott's CV out, it keeps on going. It's this long, and we've laughed about it. You know what I mean? I mean, she worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency. At one point, her husband did work at Area 51. Nothing sinister or secret, but nothing out of the ordinary. Somebody said to her one day, what did your husband do at Area 51? She said, I don't know, never asked him. It was just work. It was, boring stuff. He worked at, part of Area 51 is Nellis Air Force Base. He worked there. And so we put it all in the book. And what is amazing, guys, let me just get a drink, if I may. Every time we got the manuscript finished, we'd find another person to interview. So Irina would interview them. She'd send me the transcript. I put it in the book. That's it, done. Then there'd be another one. So come September the 1st last year, we said, that's it. No more. No more editing. The book is out now. No sooner had we done that than a lady called Chelsea Norton Prince from the Ocean Springs Historical Society in Mississippi contacted us. That society has its own Facebook page. And Chelsea was interested in this case. She put a couple of postings on there. She met Calvin and bought a book off him. One of their members, a lady by the name of Bethany Fayard, contacted Chelsea and said, I didn't know you were interested in this. I have 2 boxes of paperwork that used to belong to Mr. Hickson. Do you want them? She said, no, I have. She got them and contacted us. Bethany's mum and dad bought Charlie's house when he died, and these papers were just left in it. At one point, she had a load more, but she gave them away years ago. Couldn't remember who she gave them to. So we ended up, Chelsea, bless her, digitized them all and sent them to me. And they had a snapshot back in history of people writing to Charlie and Calvin. Calvin didn't get to know about any of this because he was gone. But just to give you an example, there is a letter that Charlie received from a NASA physicist. I've checked his name up online. It's all kosher. And he said, Charlie, I personally asked my boss at NASA to look into this case when it happened, and they were not interested. And I'm thinking, what a chance missed. Here is Irina and I doing all this historic investigation. Look what we've turned up. Imagine if you'd been able to mount a full criminal investigation back in 1973, or a scientific investigation. What else could you have uncovered? You know? And it's kind of sad, you know? So no sooner had we drawn the line in the sand when more information cropped up. Now, back in 1973, 2 days after the incident happened, 2 doctors arrived on site. Dr. James Harder, he was a consultant to one of the main UFO groups in the day called APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. And of course, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, the man who invented the phrase close encounters, worked with Spielberg on the movie. He turned up as well. They viewed all the information, spoke to everybody, and Hynek held a press conference saying these 2 guys are genuine. So we're looking for stuff. Now, APRO has long since closed, gone, finished. But their files were held by a couple in Arizona. But they wouldn't let anyone go near them, because I'm thinking Dr. Harder must surely have put something down in writing and given it to APRO, because they'd sent him, they'd paid for his flight and his hotel and everything. And I contacted these people, and they were very nice, but they clearly weren't going to give you anything, so I kind of forgot about it. December of last year, again, just a couple of months after the book was published, a friend of mine called David Marler. David runs the National UFO Historical Records Center in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Fabulous archive. And he contacted me. He'd got the APRO files. This couple, the lady had died a couple of years back. The one fella was called Brian Myers, who was looking after all these files, was moving house. And he didn't want to take them with him. He wasn't going to use them. So he donated them all to David. Within a couple of weeks, David sent me an email saying, have you got these audio files, Philip? They were all from those few nights in October 1973. First audio recording is Charles Hickson So just a couple of hours after this abduction had happened, he sat in the sheriff's office telling them what's happened. And it's recorded. Then we have the secret tape. So that's Charlie and Calvin been left on their own and the recording taping them. We have that. Next, we have Dr. Harder on the 14th of October. So just a couple of days after, he put Calvin under hypnosis for 11 minutes. We have that recording. We have Dr. Hynek interviewing the sheriff. There was a chap called Sheriff Fred Diamond. He's interviewing the sheriff. And then we have Dr. James Harder conducting a press conference, all on different tapes. Nobody knew these even existed, let alone have listened to them. So you have a little snapshot in history there that night and the subsequent nights thereafter, you know, and they had a gold mine, and they will all be released in due course.
Yeah, part 2 coming.
Yeah, well, part 2 and 3, take it from me.
Why do you think NASA didn't want to investigate it at the time?
You tell me. I don't know. I have no idea. You know, it was a silly season subject back in 1973. Even when I started in the 1980s, we always used to have our conferences in the summer because Parliament was in recess and the football season had finished. So when you were trying to get some media coverage, you got a better chance in the summer because it was looked upon as being a silly season, the silly season being the summer. You know, what it was like in 1973, I can only guess, you know, looking at some of the historical things that I've viewed. But now NASA have got their own UFO study going. They've had a public meeting about it, and it'll be interesting to see what they turn up with, if anything. You know, it's unlikely, but who knows? Who knows? But what a chance missed. What an opportunity missed.
Insanely bad miss.
Yeah. And to me, this is almost the perfect case. The only thing we don't have is a piece of film or a photograph. But that would never surprise me if that didn't turn up one day in somebody's basement, you know? It really wouldn't. And like I say, the witnesses we've interviewed, we've now made one documentary, or helped make it. That's on Netflix now, in a series called Files of the Unexplained. It's the first, it's episode 1. It's only 35 minutes long. Watch it. We're making 2 more documentaries, one with a Canadian company, one with a British company. They'll be ready at some point this year.
Is that all on this case?
Yeah, absolutely. The British company, for example, I've got the list here. They interviewed 13 different people for this documentary. 13. How many make it onto the documentaries is up to them, not me. I just supplied them with the contacts. So myself and Irene are our consultants on it. We've both been interviewed for it. And they'll be out later this year. So who knows what else will crop up. And for me, you know, I've written other books and I've co-authored other books, but for me, this is a landmark study. It really is. And, you know, if I never, I've got some more books coming, but I don't think I'll be able to top this one. I really don't.
From your explanation, it just seems like the most well-rounded and in-depth. And the craziest part of it all is what we're looking at the best part of 50 years ago.
Yeah, but 50 years ago when it happened,
yeah,
I was a teenager. I left school the following year. I was 16. I left high school in 1974, the year after this happened. So it shouldn't really have been a surprise that there were a lot of people around that were that either my age or a little bit older. Calvin was only 68 when he died. So he was only, you know, 18 in 1973, only a few years older than me when it happened. So there's a lot of people now reaching that age group where they couldn't care less what anybody thinks. This is what I saw, Philip, and I really don't care. If people want to laugh, let them. I'm not interested, you know. And some people didn't come out. We found Mr. and Mrs. Blair because their daughter made a comment. We found others from other sources that didn't come out. So it's not people wanting their 5 minutes of fame.
Mm.
It's a curious way, but that's all thanks to this technology that we're using today, of course, and a bit of grit, determination, detective work, and stubbornness. Not taking no for an answer sometimes. I know you've got some information. Give me it, or else. I know where you live. I've no idea where you live, by the way, but you know what I mean. And it works. And I've been involved such a long time. I know a lot of people. And what did happen? Someone would say, "I haven't got anything, Philip, but I think so and so might have." So I go and ask so and so. And say, "Oh yeah, I've got that, Philip. Yeah, fine. Here, there you go." And it's in my inbox. Another bit of information, and that's how it works.
Yeah. And I guess if you're going to look at it from a timing perspective, you've got actually a really good timing on it because you've got your experience behind it all. So you know what questions you need to ask. You've got the internet, as you've just said, the greatest communication tool ever. And you've also got a timing where people feel a bit more comfortable letting their stories out.
Yeah. Well, Kelvin was the same. He felt vindicated, because they were like, "I told you so." Got all these other people. It wasn't just me and Charlie. Look, and these people aren't lying. And even the sheriff, Fred Diamond, he had a UFO sighting 2 days after this event, and it made the local paper, and we have it. So even the sheriff. We spoke to the police dispatcher who was on duty that night. He's the one that took the call from Charlie Hickson, and he put it through to the sheriff's department. And he said, "Philip, I had 50 plus phone calls of UFO reports that night." He says, "When I knocked off, went back to the police station, there were people there reporting things in person."
Oh.
So, perhaps we shouldn't have been surprised how many people. We know there are other people out there that have seen this, were witness to it that night. And whether they want to speak about it is entirely up to them. But we've accumulated so much material. It's just uncanny. It really is. So it's almost a perfect case, gentlemen.
Absolutely amazing, that case.
That's my wife. That's my wife.
Hopefully, when the with the book being out and the documentaries coming out, it adds more exposure to the case. And
well, that's what we hope. It'll encourage others. If you watch, I don't know if you have Netflix, but if you've got Netflix, watch The Files of the Unexplained. The first episode is about this case. There are a couple of witnesses interviewed on there, but it is only a couple. There's Charlie Hickson's son, Eddie, interviewed. It will give you some idea of what's to come.
Right. I'm going to check it out, yeah.
It will give you some idea, and times that by 10, and is what you'll find in our book. And if you're only going to buy one UFO book this year, as biased as I am, and I would say you cannot go wrong but buy this one. You will not. You might not agree with everything, but that's fine. But you will not regret it.
you can get that on Amazon, right?
So they're all on Amazon, yeah.
On Amazon, yeah.
Anywhere in the world, apart from Lancashire. Even Amazon won't deliver to Lancashire. The foreigners will. If any foreigners listening to this tonight, I have no idea what we're talking about.
Yeah, they will.
Not a clue.
No. The Americans might. Lancashire.
Yeah.
No, this has been amazing, Phil. Thanks.
It's my
You've sold
pleasure.
me on that book. I'm going to get it ordered.
Well, good. My grandchildren will be able to come and see Grandad next week, and I'll be able to give them a few quid then. Thank you very much. Just think, you're looking to support my grandchildren as well.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll leave links to the book in the description and everything. But thank you for coming on today. It's been amazing.
No, it's been my pleasure, gentlemen. And like I say, everything I've said is my own personal opinion. People don't have to believe me. Make up their own minds. That we have this marvelous tool in front of them that, it's just amazing. and the information, the truth is out there. You only just got to look for it. And don't listen to anyone. Draw your own conclusions. I'm not here to dictate. I give you the benefit of my information and my experience. You decide for yourself.
Yeah, 100%. And you can tell just from this conversation we've had today that you're genuine, and you're not. You've got your opinions, you've got your theories, but you're not. Nothing's facts. Like, we don't know.
And if you ever film an alien while you're out walking the dog, don't let your son tape over it. All right.
Yeah. All right then, guys. Thank you very much for listening, everyone.
My pleasure, gentlemen, and dare say we'll speak again.